I think people do not realize what has been normalized here. I mean, every single rule in the book, norm, value, morality has been broken. Whether it's concentration camps, rapes, destroying complete cities, flattening it, torture, open and just genocidal language, etc. And anybody who thinks it's gonna stick to the Palestinians is just crazy, because it will jump from Palestinians to another enemy, to the other enemy, until it's the working class, until it's leftists, until it's pretty much everyone who's against it. And those who think, oh, it's not me, yes, it is you. You know, the Palestinians are us. It's humanity. We're not gonna let go, and we're gonna haunt them, because what they are doing is so evil, is historically seen also so incredibly evil. They are not going to get away with this.
If the Nuremberg laws were applied to the genocide going on in Palestine, quite a few journalists working for The Guardian and BBC, as well as other networks and dailies, would be hanged. There is no place in the world today, as far as I can tell, where greater and more courageous and more noble resistance is being put up to the global capitalist war machine than in the Arab world.
I'm so tired of this, that many of these discussions, for example, Yanis Varoufakis, and also what's his name, Richard Wolff, they seem to have such a basic understanding in many ways, in that they only talk about the trade war effects of the dollar. That is, dollar hegemony is the reason why there's an abuse of the SWIFT system, or a use of sanctions, or the confiscation of reserves. You know, and this is the only thing they talk about. And I'm always saying, and of course I learned that from people like Michael Hudson, is the biggest problem of the goddamn dollar is that the United States has endless money streams to fund imperialism endlessly in every single corner of the world.
Could China do significant damage if it completely cut off trade to Israel? Yes, it could. Would it be devastating to the Israeli economy? No, but it would hurt.
Yeah,
it would definitely hurt. And so they're not using a tool at their disposal, which I believe they're obliged to use under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. If we let them get away with it, we're next.
All right. Good day, everyone. We are here again with our brother Dimitri. We have to vent a bit because we are all. I was just discussing with Dimitri. We are all, to be honest, experiencing collective trauma with what is going on. Of course, it's incomparable to what the Palestinians are enduring. But I do think that we are really suffering of collective trauma. This is one of the worst experiences of our lifetime, I dare say. And with who to talk, who is better to talk about that than Dimitri? And I just wanted to talk a bit about everything that's going on today with regards to imperialism, Palestine, of course, etc., etc. But before we do that, welcome, Dimitri. How are you doing?
As well as one can in these unfathomable times, brother. You know, we just try to get by day to day and maintain a spirit of, I don't want to say optimism. I don't think optimism is good or useful. I think one should be realistic, but one also has to remain strong. And that's a challenge today.
Yep. Peter, how are you?
hanging in there. I mean, I hit the kind of trauma you're talking about a couple years early because, you know, it's clear by 2020 that we weren't going to do anything to solve the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, which basically means, you know, it sounds like we care about the bear ever. Oh, it means we care about humanity and especially the poorest people around the world. That was not going to be solved once we lost the primary election in 2020. And then it basically guaranteed a Biden or Trump foreign policy, which would include things exactly like the genocide in Gaza, and probably worse. I mean, what we've been talking about in terms of like the dangerous legacy of this genocide is that now concepts like proportionality in international law are out the window. If it's a 500 to 1 proportion, perfectly fine. Murder those 500 people. So, you know, I've been dealing with this sense of I don't know what the word is, political trauma for a while, and now this is just the next accelerant of that. But yeah, I think ideally we can try our best to be to practice the non-attachment in the Buddhist sense of not letting your very rational feelings and reactions to what's going on in the world sap you of all vitality and make you useless because you can't do anything. Just don't let yourself be paralyzed.
Well said. Well said. Exactly. And what you say about proportionality is so important. I think people do not realize what has been normalized here. I mean, every single rule in the book, norm, value, morality has been broken. Whether it's concentration camps, rapes, destroying complete cities, flattening it, torture, open and just genocidal language, etc. And anybody who thinks it's gonna stick to the Palestinians is just crazy, because it will jump from Palestinians to another enemy, to the other enemy, until it's the working class, until it's leftists, until it's pretty much everyone who is against it. And those who think, oh, it's not me, yes, it is you. You know, the Palestinians are us. It's humanity. And I think nobody realizes what has been normalized here. That stuff is really, really disturbing me. I don't know how that is for you, Dimitri.
I wouldn't use the word normalized. I think that how one views the horror depends on who one is and what one's moral character may be, and the circumstances in which one has been raised, and the experiences one has had in life. For many people, this is not normal at all, and I think the number of those people is actually growing. I don't have any scientific evidence to back that up, but I feel a rising anger in my circle of contacts, not just friends, but contacts, professional contacts as well. What has happened, the way I would describe it is that if they get away with this because of the audacity with which it has been done, and no one is held accountable of the many people in positions of power who bear responsibility for this monstrosity we're witnessing every day, then they will be emboldened, and they will come after all of those constituencies. I totally agree that that's where this is heading. The Palestinians are on the front line of a fight for human decency and all that we hold dear, and for just civilization. And if we do not hold accountable the people who are doing this to them, we're next. We should have no illusions about that. But I don't think that this is, being generally accepted by the population. Some elements of the population, sure, some even support it. A shocking number of people support this monstrosity, even today. But there are a lot of people who are, as we are, traumatized and outraged, and increasingly so.
Yeah, there is data to back that up, at least in the US. And I would imagine if you looked in Canada and Europe for similar public opinion polls, you might find something similar. But I think it was from Pew in March. They polled people and broke it down by age group and partisanship. And they found that majorities who identified as Democrat or independent in the US had shifted considerably on their views on the Israeli government. Now majorities in those two groups have a negative view of the Israeli government. Among Republicans, it's still majority positive, but when you break that down by age, you see that younger people who identify as Republicans, the majority of them have a negative view of Israel, which is unprecedented in recent U.S. history, perhaps since the foundation of the State of Israel. So there definitely is evidence that backs up your sense that you get from your contacts and friends.
Yeah, there was a friend of mine, actually, a comrade from the Jewish community in Canada, who's a tremendous champion for the Palestinian people. He sent to me yesterday an article from some kind of commercial magazine in Israel from February of this year, which announced with great anxiety that Israel had the worst brand in the world now. They looked at Israel's image from a commercial and marketing perspective, and they said it's the absolute worst in the world, and that this was going to inevitably have catastrophic impacts on Israel's commercial relations internationally. That was in February, so it can only be worse now. So there are, this is having a tremendously negative impact for Israel in the minds of the public. We're just not seeing this fully reflected in the elites. Although there are signs, we can talk about that today if you want. Like Piers Morgan is one that's been talked about, quite a bit recently. Whatever his motivation may be and whether his newfound concern for Palestinians is genuine, he certainly has changed the tone and substance of his reporting on Israel and Palestine. And we've had an unprecedented threat, although it has not been acted upon yet, on Monday of last week by the Canadian, French, and British governments to impose targeted sanctions on Israel. These are just a couple of indications. So there's pressure on the elite to change their policies. They're never going to have a conscience, and our appeals to their conscience aren't going to work. But we can apply sufficient pressure to cause them to change their policies. So I personally feel that, if anything, this is becoming less normalized in the minds of the public. But as I said, if we let them get away with it, we're next.
Yeah. And what I also notice is something very interesting, and that gives me hope. That is, they've tried now for 2 years to shut us up, to do everything to make this stop. But there is this persistent group of people that does not let go. And even though they can be small, if you look in history, it's always that small, persistent group of people who eventually start a wave. And I think that is also in this case, because it was dying down, and in some areas it is dying down. But suddenly you have these huge marches again. I'm talking about minimal 100,000 people in the Hague, in my country. The Netherlands. I mean, the Netherlands, one of the most pro-NATO, pro-Zionist colonial countries in Europe. So something's going on. People are not letting go, and they're mobilizing people again. Because this is something people, I kid you not, I really think people are not going to let this one slide. They're just not. And you can jail people like Khalil and that Turkish student, and you can try everything you want. People are not going to let go. And you said something very important, Dimitri, about this time they need to be punished. Like, let's be honest. Let's not forget George Bush never got punished. That guy did at least as horrible things as Joe Biden. I mean, those days, I mean, we all remember it still. We're one of the most horrendous days ever, the war on terror and the post 9/11 world that we lived in. You almost forget it because of the horrors that are happening now, but it was bad. It was really, really bad. And they got away with it. They all got away with it. And that horrible UK guy, what's his name? Tony Blair got away with it too. He's walking around like a happy millionaire, like all of them. So I saw this speech by Owen Jones a few days ago, which was a very good one, a pro-Palestine speech, where he said, this time we must be convinced and really believe the fact that we are going to jail them. They are going to jail. Those of whom we always thought these people are above the law, they're untouchable. This time we are going to believe it. They're going to jail, and we're going to catch them. And I think that was so powerful that he said that, because I think he's right. We're going to get them. They're going to jail, and we're including the media. We're not going to let go, and we're going to haunt them, because what they are doing is so evil, is historically seen also so incredibly evil. They are not going to get away with this. And I think a lot of them are feeling it. That is why people are turning. You just talked about Piers Morgan, for example. They're turning. There's a reason why they are turning while they've been celebrating genocide. They feel the
Yeah.
heat. People are not letting go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of accountability, yesterday Tariq Ali published on X a comment about a Nazi propagandist, Julius Streicher. He actually reposted a post from Iliam Cunningham, and the post was, at Nuremberg, Julius Streicher was not convicted of having committed or participated in any crimes or acts of violence himself, but was convicted on the grounds that as a journalist, his many speeches and articles supporting and excusing violence made him an accessory. He hanged. And so Tariq Ali said, if the Nuremberg laws were applied to the genocide going on in Palestine, quite a few journalists working for The Guardian and BBC, as well as other networks and dailies, would be hanged. Now, although I have been traditionally an opponent of capital punishment, I confess that I feel some attraction to the idea of hanging these people. But whatever one may think of capital punishment, the accountability has to extend to the media. Whatever we do, okay, it can't just be the political actors and the military commanders. We have to, at least the most prominent examples of those who have aided and abetted and incited this genocide in the media, they too must be held accountable in some way, which I think has to include, at a bare minimum, jail time. We can't allow this.
I mean, I was going to bring up the.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to bring up the Nuremberg tribunals as well. Like, that's an established principle in international law that incitement to genocide is a crime, punishable crime. So yeah, I likewise think that there's a case certainly to be made. I mean, I was shocked when the ICC issued those arrest warrants because, the joke had been that it wasn't the International Criminal Court, it was the International Criminal Court for Africa, because they would only go after, war criminals from powerless countries that weren't essential to the empire's needs.
International
the fact that they actually issued those arrest warrants is, yeah, that's another one. Yeah. So, that's a bit of a sign. On the media question, there's like a somewhat hopeful angle to this too. I was listening to this Council on Foreign Relations talk a few months ago, and they were talking about social media, and it was quite striking to see the main speaker explain this as, like, you could understand what was going on in her head. She's thinking, oh my God, these kids, they don't really understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They need to understand it in the way that I understand it. She's full pro-genocide, pro-Israeli government, whatever they're going to do, because that's a useful tool for U.S. imperialism. And plus, she probably has, her own beliefs about how the Palestinians are fundamentally evil, etc. But in her understanding, she's thinking, I have the truth. I see the reality as it is. But all these kids, they're getting this propaganda on their social media and they don't agree with me. So what are we going to do? We have to, come up with more effective messaging to try to convince these kids of the truth, which is what I believe. But to see the kind of muted panic in her voice and in her thinking, I found very reassuring that, if some of the worst people who have a view of the world that results in untold human suffering are worried about the ideas in the heads of masses of young people, for the rest of humanity, that's a great thing.
Yeah. Well, I would say a lot of them know. A lot of them really know what's going on, and they're just pandering to power and pandering to money. And I think what you just said, Tariq, Dimitri, Tariq.
I accept the compliment.
Yeah.
Very kind of you to confuse me with that wonderful gentleman. But sorry.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Dimitri, about Tariq, I wanted to say, is something I'm sure this is happening. I think people like name any journalist who've been celebrating genocide. I think they're feeling the threat that comes from posts like Tariq Ali's post. they're feeling it. They're feeling the heat, and they should feel the heat, because this is never going to be forgotten. Never. These guys have contributed to genocide. They have contributed it. They have extended it, and they have created untold suffering among the Palestinians, and in extension among the region, and in extension the whole world. And that also gets me to a discussion I saw recently about on a Real Progressives with a guy named Steve Grumbine, and he interviews always very interesting people. And today, or yesterday, or a couple of days ago, I don't know, he interviewed a very interesting anti-capitalist thinker, a Green New Deal kind of thinker from Algeria. And the guy's name was Hamza Hamouchen, if I am not mistaken. Let me quickly check. Hamza Hamouchen. Yeah. And he said something very interesting and very important. I've also noticed that doesn't get enough attention. And that is the fact that he said that we must understand that the Arab kingdoms, the Gulf kingdoms, play a crucial role in maintaining capitalism, and that the resistance in the region, but also in the world, needs to understand this. Capitalism falls without these kingdoms and without Israel. These are so crucial, these Gulf states. We're going to have Gerald Horn on again soon, who will talk about, for example, Africa and the imperialism of the Gulf states in Africa. They're super active over there. And this is so important because it reminds me also of another discussion I saw on a different channel called The Cradle, where a journalist said, why is it that the resistance is not focusing on the big guys? That is, the big guys in the Gulf. And think about all these royal families that are just controlling, that are such an important aspect of imperialism, and that are in full support of the genocide right now of their Arab brothers and sisters. I mean, they are so deeply nested into the Western imperialist capitalist system. And he made a very good point. Why is the resistance fighting all these low-level terrorists, in Syria, and all these on-the-ground terrorists? They're spending all their manpower on that stuff. And he said, as a journalist of The Cradle, why are they not aiming for the big guys? What's going on here? And I think that's an interesting discussion. They seem to be completely unscathed, these guys, including Netanyahu, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Dimitri, your thoughts?
Well, there's so many ways in which they sustain the war machine and the capitalistic model. The trading in oil with U.S. currency, for example, and creating this massive demand for United States dollars, which has very beneficial impacts to the U.S. in terms of borrowing. It uses this borrowing capacity from the reserve currency of reserve status of the U.S. currency to generate the world's largest military budget by a wide margin. Now, shortly about to surpass $1 trillion per year. There was, by the way, a study done by Vijay Prashad at the Tricontinental Institute a little while ago. He and another comrade estimated that the true U.S. military budget some 2 years ago was $1.6 trillion. How is it that the U.S. is able to finance that military budget? It's from the petrodollar in substantial part. And also the U.S. War machine is enriched directly by the Gulf autocracies who purchase ungodly amounts of weaponry from the United States, which they don't even need. And if they use it, typically to commit egregious human rights abuses in the region. The most prominent example perhaps being Yemen. So there's just a couple of ways in which they sustain this system. And I was thinking the other day, we were talking briefly about this before we started our online conversation, and there are other ways in which they play a key role in the maintenance of U.S. power in the region. For one, they pose as mediators in discussions, between the resistance and the genocidal entity. So you have Qatar and Egypt both of which are completely beholden to the United States, and both of which are abhorrent human rights abusers, posing as neutral arbiters in these endless, just painful, theatrical negotiations that have been going on now for 19 months between the resistance and the genocidal entity. It's a scam. It's nothing more than a scam, and they're key players in the scam. They're not neutral arbiters. They are there to ensure the ongoing oppression and extermination of the Palestinian people. That's exactly what they're there to do. And this narrative, as you were mentioning, Karim, when we were talking about this earlier, that Qatar is like, the main source of financing for Hamas. I don't, whatever, financing it may or may not have provided to Hamas, Qatar is not pro-resistance, and anybody who thinks that is living on planet goddamn Mars. Okay, these people are firmly aligned with the Anglo-American Empire. So I think that Comrade Hamza Hamushen is absolutely correct. That they are a key part of the problem, and not nearly enough attention is paid to the role that the brutal autocracies of West Asia play in the sustenance of the war machine and the global capitalist system.
And that brings me to one more way. That brings me to one more way in which these autocracies, and in particular MBS and Saudi Arabia, maintain Western hegemony. And it's also that's what I find very important as a social psychologist, and that's the psychological aspect. And what they are doing, and it's so insidious, is they maintain Western power also by confirming stereotypes. I mean, MBS is the perfect Western stereotype of what it means to be an Arab. I've written about it on my Substack as well. I've done a long article on Islamophobia. People can read it and how that psychologically works. And he is just such a perfect Hollywood stereotype. He's autocratic. He's depraved. He's sexually depraved. And of course, he funds extremism. He funds all these extremist kind of doctrines. He's the perfect, ideal, simplistic stereotype of what it means to be an Arab, instead of the beautiful, rich diversity of Arabism that we see all over the region, including, for example, Palestine. You know what I mean? And it is so insidious. And I love what Sina Rahmani said. He was on our show recently in an interview, a very interesting guy. And he said he always says the pedocracies of the Gulf of the Middle East, the pedocracies of the Gulf state. I had to think about it. Pedocracies, and I was like, he always has such cool jargon, man. Sina, and he's really good at that stuff. And I was like, this is such a good one. Yeah, that brings me to the discussion we had before we started the show. Of course, they are pedocracies, because the United States always supports the most depraved leaders there are. Then you're part of the imperial club. They are a very tight-knit, psychopathic, sexually depraved club who have spent their history hundreds of years keeping each other in power, because then they can do what they want. They are a team. And that's why somebody like al-Jolani / al-Shara is also in power in Syria and becoming big friends of the West, because he is just as depraved as the rest of them. If you are not a depraved person, let's say what we just talked about in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, who actually tries to help the poor, who's tried to help the people who suffer, the indigenous people, they will do everything to get rid of you. They will do everything to portray you're a corrupt human rights abuser. But if you're a monster, a sexually depraved monster, like al-Jolani, like what we have across the Gulf states, what we have in Southeast Asia of some of these guys that were supported, or what you saw in Brazil with that crazy guy Bolsonaro, you name it. If you are a monster, a corrupt, depraved monster, you will get amazing pieces in the New York Times about what a great reformer you are and such a democratic thinker. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, if you're the empire, you want your vassals to be sexual deviants because it's easier to control them. You have compromising material on them, so they prefer that their vassals be sexual deviants.
But they see themselves in them. They see themselves in them. I mean, look at all of them, all of the United States presidents. If you dive into their personal life, their history, they're all depraved. They're all sexually depraved.
Yeah. I have to say, I've been, to the region of West Asia so many times in the past 2 years, and Lebanon, Iraq, and I was most recently in Iran. I was in Palestine, and I was, as much as possible in contact with people who were in some way or another involved in resisting Western hegemony in the region. And my impression of people on the ground in the Arab world is exactly the opposite of the stereotype. The purity of their motives, their courage, their steadfastness, their self-sacrifice, their discipline blows my mind. I've never encountered that anywhere else in the world. One of the reasons why I keep going back there is because I find it so inspiring to interact with these people. There is no place in the world today, as far as I can tell, where greater and more courageous and more noble resistance is being put up to the global capitalist war machine than in the Arab world. And I have a partner who's of Algerian origin, and periodically she becomes very disenchanted with the Arab world. She had an episode recently where she was saying, listen, I'm going to change my name. I'm going to change my name. It's going to be a non-Arabic sounding name because I'm so ashamed. And I said, please don't ever say that again, because you should be prouder than anybody on planet Earth about what the Arab peoples are doing today. There's no greater source of resistance.
And Algeria in particular, by the way, Algeria, even Gerald Horne keeps repeating it. Algeria is one of the few that is actually openly resisting all these powerful nation states. You know what I mean? And me as a half Algerian guy, I totally get what she said. I remember an old discussion I had with a Turkish friend of mine when I was in my 20s, and I said, like, I was still, my mind was still developing, so to speak. It's always developing, by the way. And I was just discussing about, yeah, so what is there to be proud of? Look at all these Arab states and this and that. And he said exactly the same. And it's true. If you are not proud, you are actually falling for the stereotype that the Arab world are these depraved losers. These are these rulers. I mean, the Arab world, go walk around, talk to Arabic people, I'm not talking about these depraved colonialist, imperialist losers. I'm talking about the people, and you will see what a warm and kind-hearted and very intellectual culture it is. And also the way they're spoken about women, the kind of respect you often see, and that we often don't see in the West, while we think like, okay, walking around in tight leggings makes the West so women friendly. But actually, if you really talk to a lot of people in the Arab world and in a lot of Arabic cultures, it's a very different understanding and a very often respectful conception of what it means: motherhood, being a woman, all that kind of stuff, and beauty of a woman, etc., etc. And I also had to unlearn that as somebody, of course, who is a half Dutch individual who grew up in the Netherlands, who was born there. So I get what your partner is coming from, but I also know for sure that once you learn about the other side, you will quickly unlearn all these stereotypes in your mind.
Yeah, I really want to second that point.
I'm sorry, I just want to say I'm happy to report that she abandoned the idea of changing her name. So, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I just really wanted to second that point, because as a U.S. citizen, I think it's extremely important for people to keep separate in their minds the people of a country versus their government / ruling class. There's often a massive divide. And, I have a personal stake in people keeping those two things separate. But of course, the same principle goes everywhere in the world, including the Arab world. And to follow up on the some of the psychological aspects of the Gulf states, the political economic picture is, I think, important to understand. It sounds almost like a apologia for the ruling classes of the Gulf states, but that's not my intention at all. It's simply to lay out the kind of pressures that they are navigating in the global system. So take Saudi Arabia. You recognize that there's no long-term future in being the world's gas station, right? Like you know that at some point the source of your wealth, oil, is going to be dried up. Not literally necessarily, but demand for oil is not going to be the thing that turns your country into a rich country long term. You recognize you're on borrowed time. So you're desperately trying to shift your economy into anything else. There's a huge push for AI. There's that ridiculous Neom city, the city connected by a long train line. You know, like all this. They're desperately seeking to shift their economy onto a different track so that they're not so reliant on fossil fuels. So in the minds of the ruling class in Saudi Arabia, their calculus is, okay, we might, some of them personally might feel sympathy for the Palestinians. Probably MBS, I doubt experiences very much empathy, but leaving that aside, regardless of the level of empathy you have, you're in this position where you're thinking, well, we can't break out of the US security and economic umbrella. We can't break out of that alliance, because then how are we going to continue this plan to transition our economy into different directions? We need that money to continue to flow. We need that diplomatic relationship with the US. We need the economic relationship with the US. We need the security, they think, because they have turned Iran, like the US ruling class, into a bogeyman for themselves. But that's the position that they feel that they're in. And to a large extent, most of what I said, I think, is accurate and I would agree with. But the key point comes in, you can still attempt to break out of your position as so reliant on fossil fuels and transition into other areas without being the US's gendarme in the region. But I think it's useful to try to understand like some of that political economic context also for Egypt. What the choice that I think the Egyptian ruling class sees in front of them is, yes, we could help to stop this genocide. We could open up routes to get aid into Gaza. But if we take that route, we're basically guaranteeing utter destitute poverty for our country. The levers that the US government can pull can absolutely sink our country. And of course, from their perspective, sink the government, which is the worst thing probably for them. But that's kind of
Yemenis
the logic.
Yemenis don't give a shit.
Yeah, they also have less to lose in a sense, because they've already been decimated by Saudi, UAE, US, UK since 2015, and they started off a much poorer country. But these countries with a little bit more to lose, I think it's helpful even in just thinking of strategy for people in those countries to try to understand the thinking of the people that they're opposing, the ruling class of those countries. Same thing for anyone in the world, though, just to try to understand how they're perceiving their position in the global system and how that can influence the way that they act. And of course, last thing I'll say, that's not at all to justify the moral choice. It's just explaining the circumstance in which the wrong moral choice is being made.
Yeah. Since you're on the subject of Egypt, there was an interesting op-ed authored recently by retired Brigadier General, Israeli Brigadier General Yitzhak Brik, who has been an outspoken critic of Netanyahu's war policies. And he claims that the Egyptians are massing huge troops in the Sinai in violation of the peace agreement with Israel, and that all indications are that they're preparing for war. I think he even raised the specter of Egypt employing non-conventional weapons, the implication being perhaps even chemical weapons. And given this critical attitude towards Netanyahu's war policies, it's kind of striking that he would be saying this. If it was somebody who was aligned with Netanyahu, you would expect them to, being playing up the threats posed by Arab governments and peoples in the region. It's kind of surprising coming from him. Do you see there's any prospect whatsoever of Egypt Egypt's dictatorship actually finally doing something concrete to save the Palestinian people, or you think there's no real prospect of that happening?
I initially would doubt it just because of the position of Egypt in the global system, but that's coming from a position of near total ignorance about the kind of ideological balance of forces within the Egyptian ruling class. I could think of plenty of reasons why they would want to amass troops, even if it's purely defensive, just looking at how the Israeli military has treated so many of the neighboring states. You might want to have a massive troops just for defending a potential invasion or series of strikes. I find it somewhat hard to believe that they would actually break with the U.S. empire and attempt to stop the genocide in any military means. But again, I wouldn't put much confidence in my own understanding, because in order to really understand the likelihood of that, you'd have to understand the thinking of people at top levels of the Egyptian military and government.
Yeah, I want to go back.
I would agree.
Sorry, go ahead, Karim. I'll ask my question in a moment. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to say that I would agree with Peter. That was the first thing that came to my mind. They feel the heat. The Israelis are sending troops south, and they are getting scared. Like, maybe they'll cross the borders to us as well. So let's show them that we have some military strength. I think that would be the only reason, but I don't think it has anything to do with the Palestinians. These depraved monsters empowered really don't give a damn.
So let's go back to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf autocracies for a moment. You're both in China. China's the new game in town in many ways. It's the biggest buyer of Saudi oil, by far the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. It is the largest trading partner of a number of Arab states. Do you see this as having an impact in the near to medium term on the geopolitical orientation of these Gulf autocracies? Do you think that they're gravitating away from the U.S. sphere of influence? Or do you think that China's emergence as a global power is not yet having any meaningful impact on the foreign policies of these Gulf autocracies?
Well, I would. I am a. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear echo in Peter's.
Yeah,
I think at Peter's. So I am a big proponent of the rise of China, and that's obvious. I think this is necessary to counteract the effects of U.S. imperialism. I think it's going to destroy the world if we go on this path. But I am also very critical of what is, in my opinion, a lack of response when it comes to what is happening in Palestine. And people can say, like, why would Russia or why would China care about what's happening there? They have enough on their own plate. And I always say that is Western ethnicized, racialized thinking. By saying, why would that ethnic group care about the other ethnic group? Because they are completely from different worlds, different cultures. Why would they risk themselves for their problems? Blah, 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 blah. And I would say, get rid of that ethnicized, racialized thinking, because it's a matter of humanity. Human beings are being erased, raped, tortured, eradicated. And other human beings with power need to protect them. And then you can say, oh, why do they need to protect them? Because as a human being, we have a sense of morality. And otherwise, we can just say, okay, screw it. We are just in the savannas, in the animal kingdom, and just might makes right. But that's what makes us different as human beings. We have a sense of morality. What is that in micro level, for example? Let me give you a comparison. On a micro level, if we see a 5-year-old child getting beaten up by 3 20-year-old men or women, what do you do as an adult? As an adult, you step in. Not because, and you're not going to tell me, you're going to think, oh, but that child is is an ethnically different child. So why do I care? I care because I'm a human being. I need to protect that child because the child is standing up against two adults. A 5-year-old cannot win. So you cannot say, oh, defend yourself. That's your problem. I'd say on a macro level, we have the same responsibility. Otherwise, this world is going to be one big hellhole. So if you have a small group of people, a small ethnic group that is fighting a powerful state, or as in this case, the most powerful empire in human history, there is a responsibility of other powerful states to protect the weak. You're not going to convince me that that is not the responsibility of those in power, because otherwise we're going to live in a black hole of humanity. Because then if you say that they have to protect themselves, they have to resist themselves, then a 5-year-old has to resist themselves against 20-year-olds. The weak cannot resist alone against the powerful, and the world is not fair. If you're a small group, ethnic group, whether you're a small ethnic group in Nigeria, whether you're a small ethnic group in Japan, whether you're a small ethnic group in Guatemala, it doesn't matter. If you are saying that the powerful do not have a responsibility to protect them, it's over. Every single country that is more powerful than the small ethnic group within their borders or outside their borders can eradicate them. There is no other thing we can do then. So I always say I'm deeply disillusioned. I'm deeply disappointed by many of the great powers in the world for not doing more. And that doesn't mean I want them to fight. No, I don't want them to fight. I don't need them to do war. I want them to do more. What can they do? They can stop trade relations with Israel. It's very simple. Quit all trade until they stop doing this stuff. Or quit. I don't know. There's so much they can do that is not in that doesn't mean war. Or force Israel. I want my aid to get in. Big aid ships, trucks full of aid, and just a lot of media attention there. As a Chinese power, you can do that. You can get all your media there. Look, we're trying to get aid in. Israel's not letting us in. You can use that power in so many ways. And I'm so frustrated that these people are still at the UN all the day. Every time I watch my YouTube, like, Russia destroys Israel at UN. Yeah, these are words, man. I just click away. I can't even see it anymore. All these human beings all over the world are doing is just 2 years of talking at the UN, condemning at the UN. And every minute Palestinians are dying. You know what I mean? So sorry for ranting on about this. I think Peter is more forgiving when it comes to China and Russia and all these kind of powers for not doing more. I'm less forgiving in the sense that I'm extremely disappointed that there's not more, that they are not doing more.
You're muted, Peter. Peter, you're muted.
Sorry. I wouldn't say forgiving. I would say cynical or realistic. But to start at the beginning of your question, I think in the short, medium term, there are some signs that countries in the region are kind of testing the waters of forming a stronger economic and diplomatic relationship with China as a kind of counterweight to the U.S. You know, the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement, the convening of all the different Palestinian factions in China to forge an agreement. You know, there are these little signs that indicate that perhaps countries in the region are kind of, you know, testing out whether they can strengthen relations with China as a way of gaining some freedom of movement from the U.S. empire. But it doesn't seem like it's anything in the short term or anything that will change things fundamentally in the short term, perhaps medium, long term. But, you know, I feel like I'm reading the tea leaves, being asked to kind of read too much out of too little. But when it comes to Karim's point, you know, I agree with the morality of the example you gave. On a micro level, of course, that makes sense. I think to make the analogy a little more close to the geopolitical situation, it wouldn't be just a bunch of adults beating up a kid. It would be a bunch of adults with guns beating up a kid. You don't have a gun, and you also have guys that are allied with them with guns right in your neighborhood, looking at you, waiting to see if you're going to do anything. Now, that there isn't a perfect analogy to describe the situation, but it's a little bit more like that. Now, you address that, Karim, by pointing out that you're not calling for any sort of military intervention. So that then you get down to the whole responsibility to protect idea that I was always opposed to, because the whole idea was propounded by people like Samantha Power, and it was pretty clear that it was intended to be used as a justification for whatever imperial planners wanted to do around the world, and then they would just, pick up a bloody shirt and say, "Oh my God, we're avenging this person's death, or we're protecting human rights," when of course the real motivation would be economic or political, as it always is. But as a principle, we already have responsibility to protect in the Genocide Convention. All state parties to that have a positive duty to prevent genocide. So I think the logic of responsibility to protect is already in place for the most heinous crime. And when I think about extending it to less heinous crimes, of course, the worry is it's just going to be used as a fig leaf, as a justification for military intervention, which has entirely different motivations, real motivations, but then they use this R2P window dressing to justify it. Leaving that aside, when it comes to Karim's suggestion that what China should be doing is kind of leading a global boycott, or sending a flotilla of aid or airdrops of aid, on those 2 points, I agree. I think that would be something really constructive that the Chinese government could do. My thinking as to why they haven't yet done that is two-part. One, it's Gerald Horne said something on our show like a year ago, where he said basically, I think the reason why China's not taking a leading role is that the Arab states in the region aren't doing anything. And when you see a house on fire in a neighborhood and all of the neighbors are doing nothing about it, you tend to kind of stand away. Or that was his basic description of the kind of foreign policy thinking that's been prevalent in the Chinese government for a long time, that we don't meddle in other countries, regardless of the circumstance. We seek to kind of follow the lead of the states in the region. And that I don't agree with. I don't think that's the right perpetrators, man. The right point. Yeah, I know. I'm saying I don't agree with that logic, but I think that logic is an accurate, that is accurately the logic that seems to govern the Chinese government's conduct of foreign affairs. And then the other point is, so you have, the Arab states in the region aren't in the lead. The other point was suggested by Qinchi Lao when we were talking to Michael Hudson a couple of weeks ago, and she says the sense that she gets within people, among people within the Chinese government and the party, is that they feel this fear that the narrative that the U.S. government and its allies are putting around the world is that China is going to be the hegemon. It's going to be the new United States. And that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to gain the exact same amount of power that the U.S. has today. And if it gains it, it will use it in just as brutal, if not more brutal, a manner than the U.S. Government has used that power. So the way that she described it is that's a major concern in their foreign policy, because of course, if you have global public opinion believing this and being in the lead on a global boycott against Israel would add fuel to the fire of that narrative. Then you want to avoid anything that can play into the opponent's narrative that you're going to be the new big the hegemon, the global evil hegemon. I don't agree with that logic, but I just bring up both points as a way of trying to explain. These are the best explanations that I have heard to try to describe, or explain rather, the thinking going on within the Chinese government.
Yeah, this inertia makes it worse, in my opinion. So if they would be so afraid of being seen as the hegemon, now actually I hear a lot of people saying, oh, they're just as imperialist as the West because look at this, they don't care. They don't care what's happening to the Palestinians. They're part of the club. Are people saying now? They're part of capitalism. Like so yeah, I find it just like you, Peter. You said you don't agree with that logic. I also don't agree with that logic. Dimitri, you wanted to say something?
Yeah,
Looks like Peter froze.
Peter froze. So you go ahead.
Okay, so I actually had the opportunity to interview on Reason to Resist last year the Russian ambassador to Canada. I went to the embassy and we sat down for an hour and had a long conversation. And I raised the question of why Russia had not imposed sanctions on Israel. And his response, I think my sense was this was, a genuine response. He was being quite candid. He said, first of all, we don't trade in arms with Israel. Secondly, we believe that the only sanctions that are legitimate are the sanctions that are approved by the UN Security Council. And any sanctions brought to the Council on Israel are going to get vetoed by one or more of the Western states on the Council. And this is a principle that we believe very strongly in. We don't believe in unilateral sanctions. And he also said, a substantial proportion of the Israeli population is made up of Russian citizens. So this is a complicating factor. Now, my view is yes, he's correct. Strictly speaking, sanctions must be approved under the UN Charter by the UN Security Council. But I think there's an exception to this. My view as a lawyer is that there's an exception, and it's Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, to which Russia and China are parties. And they do have, as one of you pointed out, an obligation to prevent genocide. And that obligation, practically speaking, means you have to do everything reasonably within your power. So I think that that provision of the Genocide Convention effectively trumps or is an exception from the prohibition under the UN Charter to unilateral sanctions. And they have an obligation to act. Now, I would say that about both of them. And I suspect that the Chinese government's view on sanctions is very similar to that of the Russian Federation. They really don't like unilateral sanctions and don't want to be seen to be approving them. But I think it's also, important to put this in context and look at the whole range of things that are happening in the relationship between Russia and China on the one hand and Israel and Palestine on the other. China has taken a position, I understand, at the ICJ in support of South Africa's genocide case. And not only has it taken a position, welcome back, Peter. I was just chiming in on this whole issue of China and Russia and how they're approaching the genocide. So China even went so far as to say at the ICJ, which I thought was remarkable, that the Palestinians have a right to employ armed resistance. You're never going to hear that out of a Western government. It's absolutely correct as a matter of international law. And they actually defended that, which I found admirable. The other thing is Al Jazeera published an article a few days ago in which, and I think it was in the context of the growing, impetus for sanctioning Israel. The article is entitled, "Which Countries Trade the Most with Israel and What Do They Buy and Sell?" And according to this article, Russia is not even in the top 15 trading partners of Israel, which is surprising given that there's so many Russian citizens in Israel. It's not even, so the bottom of the 15 is Japan at $901 million. So Russia doesn't even have, trade at the level of $900 million. The largest trading partner by far of the genocidal entity is the United States at $17.4 billion a year. Second place is $3.3 billion a year. And you're never going to guess who second place is. This shocks the hell out of me. I'm going to give you one guess. Who do you think second place is?
Turkey? No idea.
Peter? It's
Peter
Ireland.
sleeping.
Yes. It's Ireland. Who would have thought? I mean,
And I hear a lot of complaints from Irish activists that they are sick of all these people that are just like, oh, the Irish are supporting Palestine, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of course, Irish public in the public who support Palestine, but Ireland seems to be opening up its its airports and everything to ship the weapons to Palestine still.
well, they're certainly not doing everything they can. That's for damn sure. Now, number 3 is China. So, remember I said that the U.S. is 17.4 billion a year. China's at 2.9 billion a year. And this chart of the top 15 trading partners of Israel indicates that it's number 7 is China, Hong Kong, SAR. So I think what they've done is they've broken out Hong Kong separately from mainland China, and that is 2 billion. So if you combine those two numbers, it's approximately it's almost $5 billion a year, which would make China plus Hong Kong the second largest trading partner of Israel. Could China do significant damage if it completely cut off trade to Israel? Yes, it could. Would it be devastating to the Israeli economy? No, but it would hurt. It would definitely hurt. And so they're not using a tool at their disposal, which I believe they're obliged to use under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. Now, one other thing I want to mention before we go on is that the Israeli media have been reporting and have other Western media outlets, the Chinese weapons have somehow ended up in the hands of the resistance groups in Gaza. Now, this could be a complete fabrication. I don't know whether it's true or not, but they've been reporting this for months now. They're also complaining bitterly that the Egyptians are going to acquire 5th-generation fighter jets from China. So it's kind of interesting what China, are they in fact supplying weapons, or
this is also a tactic I've noticed that the Zionists use, and we all need to start being very alert on that. And that is, the Zionists have a tactic that worked really well for decades. That is, every single time shout something so that the other party is doing everything to make sure that they don't seem like actually doing that. So I've noticed something, and really watch it, you'll start seeing it. Every time a new politician comes in power somewhere, let's say in the United States, Canada, or even my country, the Netherlands, and these people can be super pro-Israel. They're super pro-Israel. They're Zionist, super pro, and still the first thing that will happen when that person comes in power is you'll get a concerted effort all of a sudden of all these Israel groups and pro-Israel, and he is known for being anti-Semitic, and this is an anti-Semite, and he's always against Israel, even though the person is super pro-Israel, to immediately discipline the person. Like, be careful. You're not, you have to show really hard that you are pro us in every way possible, because even though you seemed pro in your past, we will make you feel it's not enough and you'll get scared. So these people do their utmost best that won't happen. So they become super, even more pro-Zionist. It's a tactic they do to everyone. Like, in the beginning, I was always like, why are they always complaining, even about people who are so pro them? And it's because they've learned if they do that, they make them scared, and these people will do everything to make make it look that they are not anti-Semitic or whatever. And I think they tried the same tactic on China. Like, oh, we found Chinese weapons, and then China gets scared, and at least that's what they hope. That China gets scared and like, oh, our weapons should not end up there, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Although, I totally agree with what this is a standard tactic of these Zionist lunatics, but they're not necessarily claiming that China has, consciously funneled weapons to the resistance. So there was a British parliamentary report which theorized that, a lot of these weapons had come through Libya and Iraq, which had originally purchased the weapons from China. So in any event, I think it seems reasonably clear that the Chinese are not giving weapons to the Israelis. And the last thing I want to say about this, and this is not intended to exonerate China and Russia. I do believe China and Russia have an obligation to do more, and that I feel disappointment that they've not done more. But I think the practical reality is, as long as Western governments continue to provide weapons and economic aid to Israel, this is going to continue. The sad reality is that other than by means of military force, I mean, even if the Gulf autocracies cut off economic relations with Israel, if all the Arab states completely cut off economic relations with Israel, the West would just continue to prop it up. So I think ultimately, if we're going to put a stop to this, it's those of us living in the West who have to stop our governments from supporting Israel. That's just the practical reality. However, disappointed we may or may not be in the actions of non-Western powers like China and Russia. They have the capacity. The United States,
100%.
they have the capacity to keep, the genocide going, whatever the non-Western world does.
And that brings us to the age-old question that people need to discuss more: is why is it that the West, and in particular the United States, can send weapons on and on and on and on like water to a state to murder everyone, to around the world. Why? Because of the dollar hegemony. And people need to discuss this more. That I'm so tired of this. That many of these discussions, for example, Yanis Varoufakis, and also what's his name, Richard Wolff. They seem to have such a basic understanding in many ways, in that they only talk about the trade war effects of the dollar. That is, dollar hegemony is the reason why there's an abuse of the SWIFT system, or a use of sanctions, or the confiscation of reserves. And this is the only thing they talk about. And I'm always saying, and of course I learned that from people like Michael Hudson, is the biggest problem of the goddamn dollar is that the United States has endless money streams to fund imperialism endlessly in every single corner of the world. It's like I'm just baffled why these people who talk about dollar hegemony are not asking themselves the question: why is it that a society with just 300 million people can literally bomb and control and abuse the whole world? Where do they get these resources from? And that is the abuse of the dollar, the exorbitant privilege that they have with the dollar.
100%.
You know what I mean?
100%. If they had to slash their military budget by, if they just could no longer afford to fund the military budget, they had to slash it by 50% or more, that would have dramatic impacts on the distribution of power in the world. Huge. They can't do this. They cannot wreak havoc in the four corners of the planet without the exorbitant privilege.
Yeah, and just to quickly, one more thing about the whole Russia thing,
sadly
I think we have a delay here with Peter going.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes,
I can hear you, but there is a delay, I think. I think he's gone again. Well, anyway, just a quick comment.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to say, sadly, with regard to dollar hegemony, there was just a court ruling today.
We have to cut this. We have to cut this when we edit.
I'm just going to suggest
something. Just wait a second. So let's just, you and me, Karim, let's just stop. And then Peter, we're going to be silent for a few seconds to deal with the echo. And then Peter, you start. Okay. Looks like he's frozen now.
Now he's really gone.
Listen, by the way, we're gonna cut this out. I'm in a hotel room and I gotta get out of here in like 3 minutes. I had to.
Okay. I just wanted to say quickly that I don't know if you've seen it, but you got to see it, Dimitri. We had a very good interview with Vanessa Beeley and Fiorella Isabel. You got to see that interview. and they are one of my favorite geopolitical analysts because they give such a different conception of what Russia is doing, man, in West Asia. They completely evaporate all the illusions you have about Russia and the imperialist system. So I just wanted to say that also to our audience, watch that interview, Vanessa Beeley, Fiorella Isabel. It's a very good one, and I think you should see it too, Dimitri. So you have to run.
I do. Unfortunately, I needed to get out of this hotel room.
Oh, okay. Because I wanted to talk with you about one more thing about our friends in the anti-imperialist sphere, the usual suspects. But let's do that next time when we talk with Rami there as well.
Yeah, because if I start ranting about that, we're going to be here for another 30 minutes. So, but I do absolutely want to have that conversation with you. It's very important.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that next week. Peter, can you hear us?
I think it's back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Oh, it's just delayed. Okay, well, just in the little bit, I meant to say this back when you mentioned it, but Ireland is a huge tax haven in Europe. So I would bet that if you drill down into the exports from Ireland to Israel, the lion's share comes from U.S. tech firms that have quote unquote relocated to Ireland to escape taxes.
Good point. I hadn't thought about that. I'm not sure if that reassures me or not. I'm still very annoyed that the Irish government would allow this to happen. You know, I just on that point, when I was in Iran, I interviewed Claire Daly, the former Irish member of the European Parliament, and she was blistering in her criticism of the Irish government and how it has systematically betrayed the wishes of the Irish people to support Palestinians.
It's a capitalist Western democratic disease, man, and they're all supporting this horror, and I say capitalist also because of course the Gulf states and other parts of the world that are supporting this are also part of that capitalist club. Once capital starts corrupting your society, whether it's in politics, whether it's in business organizations, corporate sector. They can't disconnect anymore. It's too much intertwined. They can't disconnect to the extent that even blatant genocides are just not enough to sever those ties. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So unfortunately, gentlemen, I need to go. Looks like Peter is frozen again.
Yep.
So it was a great pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي انا حبيت القمر طلع القمر اصطناعي شميت الورد طلع الورد بلاستيكي تكتيكي تكتيكي